Hey everyone, what's up? This is Uri for Gorilla Poker, bringing you another high-stakes hand history review. This time it's between DavyJones922 and Stefan, both very respected, very winning high-stakes players, and Stefan currently the contender for one of the top 6 max players in the world. Definitely very creative style. Hope you enjoy it. Action starts three-handed. Davy Jones raises the button to 2.5x, roughly 100 deep. Gets 3-bet by Stefan to 1k. Sizings at this point are all very, very normal. This is the kind of recommended button open size. This is in the range of recommended small blind 3-bet sizes. So just for reference, button you want to be opening in non-ante games between 2.25x to 2.75x, I think is the limit, and this is the most commonly used size. Small blind should be 3-betting probably between 4x and 5x. So everything very normal so far, and remember all of these are very small nuances, but want to stay in kind of the recommended ranges. In position 4-bet, again, if we're talking about sizing, everything here is very technically accurate so far. So anyone who doesn't know sizings, definitely take that from these guys. When you're in position 4-betting, of course. When you're out of position 4-betting, you want to go bigger. So we see a flop in a 4-bet pot, and the board is Jack 10-9 two-tone. And first thing we want to do, of course, Stefan's going to check. First thing we want to do whenever we're looking at a spot like this is think about what does this board mean for the ranges and what do we expect the dynamics to be. And this is very different in 4-bet pots because there's so little money behind. Now, if you were to imagine the 4-bet range, don't really have to imagine it, I can show you what it looks like, just to get the general shape. So you guys can see the range in this chart. We have the kind of value portion of the range, which in this instance is going to be jacks through aces and ace-king, and these are all going to be very heavily represented in the range. And then we have kind of everything else, where you have both trickling down of pocket pairs, so a bit of tens, a bit of nines, a bit of eights. You have some offsuit Broadway bluffs, and you have some suited bluffs. And generally what the bluffs have in common is that they are being taken for the most part from the bottom of the calling range. Okay, so you would never 4-bet bluff something like Queen 7 suited because that's not good enough to call the 3-bet. And generally you don't want to 4-bet bluff something like Ace Queen suited or Ace Jack suited because it would be such a waste to fold it if your opponent shoves. So these hands are risking more as a 4-bet. The offsuit hands, especially Ace-10 off, King-Jack off, King-Queen off, they're in the calling range, but they are not super printing calls, so they're kind of fine to risk. They have nice removal effects pre-flop, having 2 high cards, and they will dominate your opponent sometimes when he calls your 4-bet. He will be calling, you 4-bet King-Queen off, and he will call something like Queen-Jack suited maybe. So these are nice hands to 4-bet, and then we have the more purely bluff hands, which are just, this is just a collection of suited hands. 10-8, Jack-9, Queen-9, King-9, and these suited aces, which all they have in common is that they are taken from the bottom of the calling range, and they're kind of spread all over the place, so we don't have one specific hand. This is something that computers really like to do because part of the premise of any computer calculation is that your opponent knows your strategy. So you don't want to only 4-bet King-9 suited because then boards with a 9 he's going to play accordingly. Just kind of all over the place 4-bets, I guess. Okay, so look at these hands and think about Jack 10-9. You'll see that all the overpairs are doing well. Bluffs, some hit, some miss. They mostly hit a little bit, but the big hand, and this is always true in 4-bet pots, is Ace-King. Ace-King is a full 14 combos here with suited and offsuit, and often it's going to be more than that in some sense. Probably is going to be more than that, I would say, in practice. Here we have 14.2, maybe it's even the full 16 Ace-King combos. And these hands are in kind of a weird situation on Jack 10-9. because on the one hand, ace-king is a really strong hand, right? You have 2 overs and a nut gut shot, doing fairly well as a hand class. But on the other hand, this is not your classic 2 overs and a gut shot, in that if you stack off with ace-king, there is a very, very high chance that some of your outs are dead. Right? So imagine we get it in with ace-king and our opponent has queen-jack. Now he'll make a straight on a king. So rather than having 2 overs and a gut shot, we have 1 over and a gut shot. And the same is true for almost any hand I'd expect it. Like any pair that hits this board is going to have an ace or a king or a queen, and some of our outs are going to be dead. So this creates a strategy where, even though the board's fairly good for us, we can't bet everything for fear of getting the equity of our ace-king denied. And then the strategy is kind of a mix of, you bet some of your ace-king and you check some of your ace-king, and then you do the same with the rest of your hands. And by doing this, you help your ace-king to kind of get to showdown and realize its equity better, while still pressuring your opponent. So all of this, as you're playing the hand, this should go through your head. Like, you see the board, you're like, okay, on this board, 4-bet pot, ace-king, this is going to be my strategy. These guys at high stakes have already done this a million times, so they should already know this instantly. And flop just goes check-check, because Davy Jones has a hand he decides to check back, and that's going to be almost any hand in his range is going to check back sometimes because of everything I just mentioned. Turn jack of spades, and Stefan leads for 1/3, even a bit smaller than 1/3 pot. And if you again think about the ace-king centered idea of the situation, this bet would allow Stefan to bet with any pair in his range. And again, just about big enough to put pressure on his opponent's ace-king. And remember, we said ace-king feels like 2 overs and a gut shot, but it isn't really 2 overs and a gut shot. It's more like 1 over and a gut shot. So there's not too much implied odds with this amount of money behind, and Stefan is just kind of painting a big target around Davy Jones having ace-king and making an appropriate bet size. You could argue maybe he should go bigger, maybe he should go smaller, but the main thing is that the shape of your strategy is correct. You don't have to get the perfect sizing in these instances. So Stefan bets, Davy Jones calls, and like we said, Stefan would be able to bet bluffs. Bluffs on Jack 10-9, the bluff that screams out is going to be ace-queen. Ace-queen is really nice to bluff when you get some ace-kings to fold. It has nice equity. And it's just not easy to have on-paired hands on a board like this. So ace-queen is going to be by far Stefan's most common bluff. And Davy Jones, if you guys remember the range, he can continue with aces, kings, queens, a pair of 10s, a pair of 9s. He can probably mix his ace-kings, call some, fold some. River 3 of clubs. And at this point, everything changes because ace-king missed. It's no longer about equity denial, and the game becomes something completely different. It's now a lot more about how much money can I get with each hand. Stefan decides to shove. Value, obviously he could do this with a jack. Big question mark if he can do it with anything else, given that we expect Davy Jones to be checking back a bunch of aces and kings and queens and jack X. So it's a very big question mark if you can do this with anything other than trips, or, aces if you slow played aces. Davy Jones makes the call, and Stefan shows up with a very surprising king 10 of spades. Pre-flop seems reasonable, turn bet seems super reasonable, and river is fairly shocking at first glance, and we'll put a big question mark about river and discuss it in a second. And Davy Jones shows up with queen 9 of spades, which, if we look at the pre-flop range and everything we talked about strategy, pre-flop makes sense, right? This is one of those bottom of range 4-bet bluffs. Flop, this hand makes sense to check back. Turn, you're certainly calling. And then on river, you just have a bluff catcher. And now I want to discuss a bit about what's going on and what might be going through these players' heads, both Stefan and Davy Jones, when making this play. And there is actually a really cool dynamic going on, or maybe a few cool exploitative type dynamics, which are worth mentioning, so we'll go over those in short. One thing is that when the river starts, Players have roughly a pot-sized bet behind, and this often creates a situation where, as Stefan, you can actually go all in with hands that have less than 50% equity when called. This is a very common concept in poker at short stacks. And the reason to do this with a hand like King 10, presumably, would be that if you check, your opponent is only going to bet better hands. If you shove, he is going to be forced to call some worse hands. So you kind of get the money in on your own terms. It often ends up a bit better than checking. I don't think that's necessarily the case here, but we're just talking about concepts that could have led Stefan to make this play. That's certainly one of them. So yeah, like I said, first concept is when there's not too much money behind, you only need 33% equity to justify a stack off. Sometimes you shove it in with hands that seem really thin, and it's actually okay. Second thing that might be going through Stefan's head, and like I said, I don't follow Davy Jones enough, but there's a very common tendency amongst players at all levels to not slow play as much as they should, and maybe Stefan thinks of Davy Jones's range here as not having too many aces, kings, queens, but rather more ace, king, 9x, 10x, and then he's just thinking, this is gonna run into a weaker range. Like maybe he perceives the ranges differently than what I described. Number 2. And number 3 is actually, I think, the most interesting dynamic going on here. I'm going to draw kind of an imaginary theoretical world where Stefan shoves only with trips and ace-queen is his bluff. Now let's say you're Davy Jones and you have pocket queens or queen 9. Which of these would you rather call? Queens blocks more bluffs from Stefan, and queen 9 blocks less bluffs. So on the surface, queen 9 should perform better than queens, and even better than aces. If you think about aces for Davy Jones, and Stefan is shoving only trips, with aces, you block ace-queen, and that's not good, right? We're trying to unblock bluffs. You could say, but I also block trips. But any card you have is going to block trips. So we're mostly looking to unblock the bluffs. And you could even dig a level deeper, like which ace-queens is Stefan most likely to bluff? And he's most likely to bluff with a queen that blocks queen-jack suited, for example, right? So a queen of hearts or a queen of diamonds would block Davy Jones from having trips more. And maybe those would be the more often bluffed queens, and then queen of spades is like an extra good suit to call. Like you could actually go that deep when you're bluff catching. But yeah, all that being said, queen 9 might be a better bluff catcher than pocket queens. And this kind of leads to the exploit of, if you're calling queen 9 but folding queens, and you're maybe calling ace 9 and king 9 but folding aces, I'm going to go ahead and shove king 10. And then we get this kind of weird effect where you fold better and you call worse. It's a very unique effect in Hold'em. It's one that I cover more in depth in my course on Upswing. But yeah, I think that is potentially what is going on here as well. So there are all these things going on. I can't get into these players' heads to tell you guys how, what exactly were they thinking? Was Davy Jones thinking, Stefan is going to have trips, so queen 9 is a really good call, and Stefan was one level ahead? Is this just kind of an inaccurate short-stacked shove? Is this an exploit because Davy Jones doesn't slow play enough? Like, all of these are possibilities on the table. We're never really going to know, but either way, hopefully after this analysis you guys see that this hand in this showdown is not as crazy as it seems. Thanks to our viewer for recommending the hand. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.